Hello, welcome to the next episode of Azure Community MTS. My name is Nicholas, and I'm joined with Robbins.
Hello, everyone.
So we're going to do some housekeeping for this session. So let me just share my screen. Can you all see that? Yeah.
It's good.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so just make it more festive. So it's welcome to, I think, this is now the 7th episode of this is a group. And as you know, to stay up to date, you can always follow us on social media like LinkedIn, Twitter, YouTube, Facebook. If you miss any episode, you can just go back easier you want. And this is the code of conduct. So yeah, all members.
You want me? You want me to do it, or
yeah, sorry.
Yeah, sure. So, code of conduct. All members of this group should adhere to this code of conduct, right? So, most things are pretty obvious, but let's go through them anyway. So, be friendly and welcoming to everyone. Be patient. Be thoughtful. Be respectful and inclusive, and be open and curious. Right. So, ask questions to understand and not criticize.
Yeah, so this is our agenda for today. So it's going to be based on Azure OpenAI and bit of some FinOps. So the first session in few minutes will be Estevao. So sorry if I pronounced it wrong. And Saleme from Amber Tech. And he's doing a session on effective cloud resource management, unleashing FinOps for Azure cloud optimization. Would you like to do the other one, Robin?
Yeah, sure. So there will be Trent, cloud security advocate and global Microsoft Sentinel subject matter expert at Microsoft, about crafting a subject-centric sidekick with Azure Cognitive Services and Azure OpenAI. Let's do this, right? For both sessions.
Okay. So we will go roughly 9:30, 9:40, and then the next episode would be on the 8th of January. It will be a session on test AKS Vision with Chaos Engineering by Steve Buston and Career and Tech by Samuel Muskran. So it's giving you some advice, tip how you can join the big tech firms and stuff. And so last but not least, we all advise you just make it interactive, ask questions, and then we just make it fun because it's Christmas period. Okay, so the first session in a few minutes will be Estevao. Let me bring him on. We can. Do you want to share your screen?
Yes. Hello, everybody. Welcome aboard. Let me just share my screen. Just a minute. Sharing. Right.
So we can still be on the screen, but we can just unmute ourselves if needed. Let me see. Yeah.
So I hope you can see my screen. Is all good?
Yeah.
All right. I'm Estevao. You almost pronounced it correctly, Nick. It's I know it's quite challenging to pronounce my name because it's a Portuguese name, but you can go by Steve. It's absolutely fine. Right. I'm going to talk about FinOps on Azure, and the title of my talk is Efficient Cloud Resource Management, Unleashing FinOps for Azure Cost Optimization. So we're going to actually scratch the surface of FinOps on Azure because there is so much to talk, and I'll try to do my best here to give an overview, and then you can ask questions, make it interactive, and yeah. So a little bit about me. I'm a software architect, currently work for InBev Tech, which is a branch of ABI and Anheuser-Busch InBev, which is in turn the largest brewery company in the world. But I'd like to make a disclaimer here. The opinions I'm going to show here and give are my own. I'm not representing them. I'm not talking on behalf of them. And yeah, that's it. I hold many different certifications in this role of software architect and developer. We have to have this broad knowledge. And as you can see, I have certifications in Java, Kubernetes, and Azure, and all that stuff. And I have a background in computer science. I hold a PhD where I could study part in Brazil and part in the UK, right? So this is our agenda for today. I'm going to bring an introduction where we talk about the motivation behind FinOps. We see a lot of people talking about FinOps, but yes, why are we talking about FinOps? And that's the main subject of this first part. Then, where can I save money? We're going to go through the Azure FinOps Review Assessment. We'll see how to analyze costs and also how to optimize costs. And here, I'll concentrate on two resources, messaging and database, because, you know, again, there is a lot of resource and we could stay the whole week here and it would be impossible to address all the resource. Okay, if we have time, we are going to do some sort of interactive session, architecting on Azure, where I bring a case study on Service Bus to decide whether we use standard tier or premium tier. And sometimes things are not actually what they seem to be. You know, you need to go deep and investigate the resource and, of course, the context, most important, in the context where you are, to select the appropriate resource. Then I'll conclude my talk and bring the key takeaways. Right. Why have companies moved to the cloud? This is a very basic question, and most of you must know this. But to know a bit more about FinOps, we have to understand to get back to these concepts. Well, there are a lot of reasons. Security, we don't want to be concerned about the underlying infrastructure, so Microsoft provides it for us. We want to scale fast and have high availability. We also want to have agility. You know, when we had on-premises environments, we had to go to the procurement division, ask them to buy stuff and wait for the hardware to arrive. So in the cloud, we don't need it anymore. We just spin up the resource we want. And also we have access to modern technology. You can see now OpenAI, and imagine it on premise. How could you leverage it? You would probably use ChatGPT and the API and call this API and that stuff. And yeah, also we are concerned about disaster recovery and business continuity. We want to guarantee no business interruption. And most importantly, we want to save costs, right, when we move to the cloud, because when difficult times come, you can shrink your infrastructure. And then when you need to scale, you can scale quite fast. And so naturally, you would have a more appropriate resource allocation in terms of money. So, and when we move to the cloud, we are basically shifting the way we operate. We had previously, when we worked on premise, we had a capital expenditure, and we are shifting to operational expenditure. And the question is, are we ready? I mean, we spin up VMs, we create AKS node pools and all that stuff. like we did before on premise, but are we ready? Are we keeping control over the costs? Because when we had on premise all these resources, we just please create a VM for me, and that's fine. And if you have any resource idling, everything was okay, right? So, and I brought here a survey from Cloud Zero, which interviewed more than 1,000 professionals, engineering, finance professionals, and they reported that the costs of their cloud were higher than they should be. And this number is staggering. It's 60%. So 60% of the interviewed subjects were not satisfied with their costs. Clearly, we have a problem here, right? All right. If they are not satisfied with the costs, there is something wrong. And where should we look? And in another survey now by Flexera, they asked respondents of cloud engineers and all the people involved in cloud and finance, and they said that 28% of their resource were being wasted. And this number is from this year, from November 2023. So last year, this number was 32%. So we are wasting less, right? We had in a year of efficiency, 2023, we saw a lot of layoffs, people caring about costs and all that stuff. So, and the main reasons, as I said before, the first one is idling. We have the resource idling. And the other reason is we are underusing, we are poorly optimizing our cloud resource. So clearly we have an opportunity there. And so who cares about the cloud costs? So we can see in this graph, and this is from Cloud Zero again, the C-levels and the board level are quite concerned because, of course, it's all about money. For them, the business are created to make money. And so if they are concerned about costs, we'll probably have another year of efficiency, 2024. You can expect another year of efficiency. And I brought here another survey from Vertis, where they interviewed a lot of participants. I don't have the number, but I left the link here, and I'll share this presentation. Then you can click and find yourself the number of participants. But basically, they said that 71% of finance leaders were targeting SaaS spend. Look, we are not talking about ERs and not PaaS here, but SaaS itself represents up to 50% of the total spending of the companies. So, and they are putting these the SaaS spend as one of the top 3 measures to save money in 2024. So we have the market growing, and of course, if we have a high demand, prices increase, right? We are paying more for the resource than, let's say, 2 years ago or 3 years ago. We have cloud wasting. We are wasting resource. We are poorly optimizing them. We have left them idling. And we have to deal with cloud cost management because there is a lot of information. How can we tackle it in a structured way? All right, that's where FinOps come into action. And here I brought a definition from the FinOps Foundation. And this definition basically says we have to have an accountability mindset. We have to shift the way that we operate. We have to collaborate. And this is basically what's said here. FinOps is an operational framework and cultural practice which maximize the business value of cloud. enables timely data-driven decision-making, and creates financial accountability through collaboration between engineering, finance, and business teams. You can see here, it's not only a matter of engineering, and everybody should collaborate together to create this financial accountability. So I brought this short video from FinOps where we can be introduced to the FinOps model and phases from the FinOps Foundation. Let me try to play it and see if the sound comes out. So can you hear the audio? All right.
We can't hear it.
You can't hear it?
No.
Very sorry. Let me try to open on another screen. Advertising. Let me skip it. So can you hear now, Nick?
Play it and see. No.
There's an option when you share, in StreamYard, when you share the screen, there's an option, there's a toggle switch to share the audio as well, I think.
Let me see if, yes, I know we have this on Zoom and other platforms, but I can't see it here.
Unshare again with audio and see.
All right, let me stop and then share a screen. Some screen let you share audio. Look for the share audio checkbox on the next window. All right, let me try it again. FinOps to share. Okay. To share audio, share a tab or a screen instead. Chrome tab. What is FinOps? All right. Also share. So thanks, Rod. You saved my day. Let me play it again.
So you've been running your infrastructure in the cloud.
Is that right?
Spurred incredible levels of innovation. But now you're blowing past budget forecasts and you're not entirely sure why. The problem is
sorry.
in the cloud, and it's spurred incredible levels of innovation. But now you're blowing past budget forecasts and you're not entirely sure why. The problem is the same model that's empowered your team has pushed procurement to the edges of your organization, and the old centralized control methods just aren't working. You need a model that gives your teams a common language, one that gets them communicating so they can manage costs without sacrificing the flexibility and velocity that's the whole point of cloud. To operate at scale in the cloud, something new is required. Welcome to FinOps. FinOps is an operating model that brings financial accountability to variable spend in the cloud. Using FinOps, your tech, finance, and business leadership teams share the same language and processes so they can manage cloud spend while maintaining velocity. The model consists of 3 distinct phases. The inform phase gives you visibility into cloud costs, for allocation, and for creating shared accountability by showing teams what they're spending and why. The optimize phase empowers your teams to take the right optimization actions based on your goals. And the operate phase refines those shared IT, finance, and business leadership goals to focus and scale your operational efforts through continuous improvement. By breaking down the silos between teams, FinOps improves the unit economics of cloud, so you can increase your usage without increasing your bill. With FinOps, your teams work together to optimize the speed, cost, and quality of your cloud, empowering them to truly rule your cloud spending. Find out more at finops.org.
Good. Let me get back to my presentation again. Share, stop, present, share screen. Okay, screen 2. All right, we just saw the definition of FinOps from FinOps Foundation, and these are the phases that we saw in the video, and I'd like to highlight them. So the first phase is inform. We have to have everybody, I would say, business, financial, and operational stakeholders informed. We have to give visibility. We have to benchmark and forecast our costs to create some sort of transparency, right? And then we have this optimize phase. This is more engineering stuff where we architect things, we try to right size, to choose the correct resource. And also we have this phase operate, which is something I think it's quite different from the on-premise environment. Now we break the silos, as we saw in the video, and everybody should participate here to create policies, models, to keep track of the business objectives, to create metrics and everything else, right? So, and indeed, in the third episode of the Azure Community Enthusiasts, we had a talk on cloud spend, and it's all about money, and it was presented by Vin Mattison, and he brought, the link is here. If you haven't watched it, I highly recommend you go back after this talk and watch this video. But basically, he brought a model as well, and it's in parentheses here, and I have mapped his model to the FinOps phases. Basically, we have the understand, which is the inform phase, the optimize, which matches exactly the same word, and the operate phase, which he called control. And so in that talk, he talked about Azure. Let me just get the laser pointer. He talked about the Azure pricing calculator, TCO calculator, all the basic stuff on Azure FinOps, which we are not going to address here anymore. And also, when we talked about optimization, we went through the storage account tiering, lifecycle, region prices to improve our costs and to save costs, and right sizing of VMs, backups, and all that stuff. And finally, he touched the license subject, which I classified in the operate phase. So what's different here then? I'll concentrate in the native tools to be informed about the costs. So we're going to navigate through the cost management blade. And also we will touch the database and messaging resource on Azure, and how can we select and see the different prices you can have depending on what you choose. Okay, where can we save money then? So before we talk where we can save money, I highly recommend you go through the FinOps review assessment. This is a free tool offered by Microsoft. And let me just open the browser to show it on the screen. So you answer a lot of questions and about different main topics. And the questions are, you can see here, the domains. I select the understand cloud usage and cost, cloud usage optimization. And the questions are like this. In your organization, product owners and engineers are, and you have the options, and I selected aware of service application costs, right? And after answering these questions, you get this report, overall results, which classifies your practices. And also there is a section on how to improve the results and recommendations. And when you click on some recommendation, you have this beautiful Microsoft learning stuff here, where you can explore and see how can you improve your costs, right? Moving on then, Okay, we saw that review assessment is a great tool, but it will not say to you where you are spending money. And I brought this graph from Vertex again from November 2023, and it breaks down the categories of resource where most of vertices, I think it's their customers are spending money on cloud. So you can see that compute is the first one. It's the highest cloud spending category.
Sorry, I got a question.
Yes,
Because
please.
FinOps is so like quite new because it's been around like since 2012. So what do like the like small businesses use then? How do they develop FinOps? Because FinOps mostly for large scale enterprise companies that have the manpower to create a teams of people.
Yes, exactly. I would say I work for an enterprise company, and of course, it demands time to create a cloud excellence center, and it requires you some investment. But I mean,
What if it's a company like who only have like 200 like employees? Would you advise them to approach FinOps or just be aware of costs in that way?
I would say to them to be aware, of course, and start small. Start small. We are going to go through from some scenarios on messaging database where you have to select the service. So you don't have to choose the best or most powerful service because it's just the most powerful resource you have.
Okay.
So you can start small, and then if you need, you scale. And of course, as the company grows, you can, I would say, you can introduce the FinOps framework, but the mindset you can leverage it, right? You don't have to apply everything because perhaps it would be a bit heavy option, but yeah, you can leverage some concepts because you certainly benefit from it, right?
Okay. Thanks.
So, and then as we can see, compute, VMs, Kubernetes nodes, application services, everything is here in compute. And so clearly, if you are in an enterprise environment, you can jump into compute because there will be a lot of opportunities, and also database. And yeah, and that's true. I can say it from my own experience. Sometimes you choose a database and a lot of resource are being idling or wasted, and you have a lot of opportunities to save costs, right? So, and how do we see and monitor costs of resource? Maybe this is a little bit basic for some, would say, mid-senior professionals, but for those who are just starting with Azure, you have the resource groups, and when you click on the resource group, you have the cost management blade, and you have this option cost analysis. And it breaks down the cost by service. You have the actual cost and the forecast cost for the remaining of the month, and it's quite useful. I would say startups, please go and start with that stuff. You don't need to create some Power BI or invest money into it because you can do it ahead, but it takes a lot of money, and maybe it's not what you should focus on when you're starting a business. Right. One question I frequently see is, so I have this actual cost and I have this amortized cost. and what is the difference between the two. And so the actual cost is the cost without reservations. So in January, when you purchased, let's say, a VM reservation, the bill will come in January, and the other months will not have this cost. And when we are talking about amortized cost, this cost is spread throughout the reservation time. And this is quite useful. And when you are budgeting, you are creating the budgets for the next year, you can see what you have to spend on. And maybe if you had just looked at the actual cost, the cost of the reservation would be hidden in January, and you would suffer in the following year, right? You can create, obviously, budgets and be alerted on the thresholds. If you, again, this is quite useful for startups. You can say, my budget this month is X, and if I reach 90% of this budget, please send an email to someone. I left the links here as well to the documentation, so you can explore. And recently, we have this amazing tool that everybody is talking about, Copilot for Azure. So what if you could use AI like ChatGPT to gain control over your cloud spend in Azure? So here I brought just this little excerpt of a picture where someone asked, virtual machines charge look too high. Is this normal? And Azure answered, charge for a virtual machine has indeed recently spiked for the month of May. Here are the charges over the past 6 months. And then you can analyze the cost. This is straightforward. You don't need to go through the cost management blade. And you can ask questions like, my business is growing and I think we need to double our storage scale. And how much would my bill be then? So you can forecast the cost here, and it's quite amazing. So I have tried Copilot. I was a little bit unlucky. I asked questions about costs and it didn't answer me. Maybe it was permission, but I asked the questions. I was not sure whether I should use storage queues or subset bus for a simple messaging scenario. And I asked it, and it answered quietly well. I had this requirement for deduplication, and it suggested Azure Service Bus, which we don't have this feature in Azure Storage Queue. So these are all the questions you might ask. How do I reduce the cost of my virtual machines and help me choose the right VM for my workload? And then you explain your workload and summarize my costs for the last 6 months. There is a lot to explore. I also brought an open source tool here created by Michiel van Oudoosten. I guess he's Dutch, I'm not sure. But he created this amazing tool, command line tool, where you can log into Azure, and then you can ask things like Azure cost by resource, and then you pass the subscription, and it prints out all the information related to it. So it's quite useful when you have a DevOps pipeline and you want to publish these reports to, let's say, somewhere else, or to send an email to someone. And you can, let's say, run this pipeline monthly to send this email to your boss, and you can leverage this tool in Azure DevOps. So let me just see how much time. So we are almost running out of time. So let's talk about service bus and storage queues. Then I got that example from Copilot for Azure, but let's imagine we had an application where we want to decouple some processing to, let's say, do it in the background to process something asynchronous, right? So we have these two services, storage queue. The use case is for simple point-to-point communication with high speed and volume throughput. And we have the service bus, advanced message scenarios with publish subscribe, which is topics in service bus, temporal decoupling, and more. So basically, I'm not going to read the difference between them, but basically you have two options, right? And I've seen a lot of people jumping into Azure Service Bus because it's the most popular service. It's specifically for messaging, and they have basically ignored storage queue. But let's move on and analyze the cost of it. So with Service Bus, we have this cost per million operations, which is 5 cents, right? And we have a storage queue, which is a little bit cheaper. This class of operations are get, send, and all this kind of stuff. But the price is basically the same, right? So you can see that Service Bus is a little bit more expensive, but you have the first 13 million operations included. So that's free, and that's the trap, I would say. And then you jump into Service Bus, but you have to pay the base charge, which you don't have on storage queues. So if we analyze the cost, if we have 1 million operations, Service Bus will not charge you the operations, but will charge you the base charge, which is 9.81. And the storage queue, you're gonna pay for 1 million operations roughly $5, right? Sorry, $4. And if we have 13 million operations, again, storage queue is still cheaper. And again, as you increase, you can see that storage queue is cheaper than Service Bus. So what is the difference here? In Service Bus, you have ordering guarantee, you have a deduplication system, you have automatic deadlettering, you can use more advanced protocols like AMQP, and you can have higher messages in terms of size. So basically, Microsoft says if you don't need these features, then you go to storage queues, right? And storage queues has something more here. If you have to store over 80 gigabytes, storage queues will be in place for you, and Service Bus is limited to 80 gigabytes. All right, I'm not sure we'll have time to talk about the database, and we have, I think, 5 minutes to questions and answers, and I'll move this, but I'll share, I promise you, I'll share this presentation on LinkedIn, and also I'll share with Nick, which in turn can share on LinkedIn as well. But basically, we would go through some sort of the same analysis when it comes to Azure SQL Server. And then we would have this architecting stuff where we would analyze the case study of Service Bus, which I would show you basically that sometimes the standard tier is cheaper of course, the premium tier when we have, I would say, a low number of operations. But as it increases, the premium services can save you money. Believe me, premium tier can save you money over the standard tier. And we would do this production analysis as well when we would have messaging units when using the premium tier. And still, it would be cheaper than the standard tier. All right, scaling, we're not going to talk about this. So this is the conclusion of my talk. I would strongly recommend you consider the context you are inserted, the scenario you are, and don't take anything for granted. Go deep and do your work, the analysis that should be taken, and also follow the good practice. We saw the FinOps Foundation. We went through the FinOps review assessment. There is also this checklist of the well-architected framework. There is a cost optimization pillar, which is quite useful to see if you are following the good practice preached by the well-architected framework. And always be frugal, regardless if you are in an enterprise company or if you are a startup. Always think small, and then you grow. Of course, if you have information that you're going to have a high load, you can then measure what you need and apply what you need. And I also left this website of the Frugal Architect, where all the things are revolve around cost and the business and the impact that we have on business. And I would recommend it for those who are architecting solutions on Azure or maybe other cloud provider. All right, many thanks for your attention. Robin, Nick, thanks for having me here. I'm all ears now for the questions if you have any. And yeah.
I have another one. So how is the FinOps here? Is that the same as green software? When people said everything needs to be green, the term is green software, or just FinOps is just a terminology?
Well, I think it's just the. Let me see if I understood the question correctly. You're saying about the green stuff, right?
Yeah,
on FinOps.
yeah, green. Yeah.
Well, I don't have information because this is more on the background of the Azure and that stuff that they are applying to hardware. But when we think small, we are actually being green, right? We are being sustainable because we are using less resource, and automatically we are, of course, saving money and using less energy. So consequently, we are being green, I would say. But it's quite difficult to measure that. I would say that perhaps while working with the physical hardware at Microsoft, AWS, and GCP, Google GCP, they would have certainly more information on that.
Okay. Anyone have any question? Robin, Rod, for Estevao regarding FinOps?
No questions from my side.
All right.
Yeah. So
thank you again.
A question here. So if there's any question, we just spoke to you. So.
All right. Thank you very much again.
Okay.
And yeah, it's now with Rod.
Yeah.
All right. Are you turning over to me? I don't think you want to. I don't know if you know what you're doing by doing that, but that was great, by the way.
Yeah.
I started while you were talking. I was looking in my. So I'm getting ready to talk about copilots. I'm glad you brought that up. I actually started looking at mine because we're gonna talk about here shortly how to build your own copilots like Azure's doing and we do with Well, we have one for Windows, we have one for Edge, we have one for everything. But talk about how to build your own. So we're going to do that. But I thought that was interesting because it's been a while since I went in and looked. So I've added this to the end. I'll show you what it actually costs to run your own Copilot. So thanks for the FinOps stuff. That actually got me interested to look. And because I know I've had that question before. Okay, this is cool, Rod. I appreciate it, but how much is it going to cost me? So that reminds me, we'll take a look at that at the end. Let me go ahead.
And the Copilot in preview is free. And you can ask Microsoft to enable it for you, and it's free.
Yeah. I don't think I need to share my system audio.
Yeah. I mean,
There you go. All right.
There we go.
There we go. All right. So I hope, and I see people already chatting in the comments. So I hope as we go along, if you have questions, feel free to ask. I would love for this session to be led by you. We were talking about this prior to the kickoff of this episode today. You know, these things are so much better when I'm talking about the things you want to talk about versus the things I think you want to talk about, right? So please don't hesitate to ask questions as we go along. So thank you so much for joining. Thank you for being here. Thank you for the interest in this event, and also thank you for the interest in these topics. I think they are going to be worthwhile and probably worthy of your attention, particularly from the AI or Copilot standpoint going forward, right? So we're at the very last bits of 2023, and this past year has been crazy when it comes to things like generative AI and things like that, right? Everybody is looking for Copilots. I think mentioned it early on at the beginning of the event that, you know, I've been focused on things like Sentinel and things for a long time. I'm still focused on cybersecurity, but like anybody at Microsoft, I'm sort of heavily focused on AI at the same time. Everything we do these days, there's some kind of AI component to it. But what I wanted to do today, my goal for us is to talk about how to create your own Copilots. I call them on this slide mini Copilots, right? So these are separate. In my mind, I envision a world where every organization has, I don't know, 50 Copilots, one for each department, because it's very specific and specialized to that department and the data that that department needs to be able to look through and sift through and have that AI assistant or Copilot, if you will, to provide that type of service for that department organization, right? So but what I want to do today is give you some insight into that. And this is what we actually at Microsoft do on the back end that you don't see in our Copilots, right? Training the model and building these things ourselves using cognitive services, which actually I think I just looked earlier today. It's not really cognitive services anymore. It's Azure AI. We keep changing things. So good thing I looked. And I appreciate being here. I've been off of work for 2 weeks, and you cannot imagine, Nick, Robin, you can't imagine how difficult it is to come off 2 weeks of trying to be brain dead to actually think about this stuff again. So here we go. We'll see how this goes, right? Let me go ahead. So this is a little bit about me. I don't want to spend a lot of time here, but if you're ever interested in who Rod Trent is or how to connect with me online or anywhere, this is how to do it. LinkedIn, X, formerly Twitter. There's a QR code if you'd like to scan that. That will take you to my blog. There's all kinds of ways to connect with me constantly. Even though I have been off for the past 2 weeks, I'm still kind of sort of working. We're preparing for what's called the Microsoft AI Tour that starts in January, and that's literally going to take up the first quarter of next year. So I can't really take a lot of time off. So I have been kind of invested into what we're working on. But again, it's really easy to connect with me. I would absolutely love for folks to be able to connect with me in person this year sometime. I talked about that Microsoft AI Tour. If you go to, envision.microsoft.com, there's a whole list of dates where you'll probably find me over the course of the next first part of next year during 2024, the first quarter. So if you're in any of those areas, don't hesitate to join that. It's a free conference. So join that and come, and we can kind of hook up and you can connect with me in person. But here's all the other ways to connect with me, the things I like to do. The one thing I absolutely want to point out as part of this slide is over on the left-hand side. That's my grand boy. I'm a first time granddad. He's, well, actually about 2.5 years old, and we're expecting my second grandkid. So super excited about that. But this is where I want to spend the focus of our time today. Okay. Yes, I want to get to the spot where we're starting to talk about and give you some ideas and help build your creativity to how to build your own co-pilots. But at the same time, I started in security. I started in cybersecurity, and I want to put some focus there because that's very, very, very important. As you start building your own co-pilots or wanting to build your own things, right? We're going to talk here in a minute about how important that first line of defense is the code or the developer, right? So there's this whole security basic framework that I want to discuss before we start jumping into demos and looking at things. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. Robin, I get a sense that you're a developer. Is that true?
No. I'm more,
Oh.
no. I'm more of an
Is
infrastructure
anybody
guy.
on here a developer? Nick, are you a developer?
No, kind of like a platform engineer. We work with developers.
I am, I would say.
You are. Excellent.
Yes.
We have a developer. Okay. All right. So you can help me out as we go along. So because again, I really like to simplify things. So there's a lot of things that we do at Microsoft sometimes. You look at our Learn docs, you look at our Learn modules, and sometimes I think customers look at them and they get a little frustrated, like, I don't have the time to spend on this. So I like to simplify things, and sometimes maybe I simplify it too much. And if that's the case, absolutely let me know and ask those questions. Say, okay, that's nice, but give me a little bit additional depth. But I like to make things simple so it's easy to understand, easy to deploy, easy to implement, and something that you can take back and do on your own, which is essentially what this session is today. So we'll talk about the AI security basics, right? And then show you how to build your own co-pilots. We call them co-pilots at Microsoft. Other people call them assistants. That's what I generally kind of refer to them myself when we talk with customers and start developing these code bases. And then again, going to focus on that security piece of that as we go along. Okay. Does that sound good to everybody? All right. So again, I like to make this as super simple as possible. People have talked about generative AI for the last year. I think it was November, maybe it was September last year, when generative AI, OpenAI announced generative AI, and it became the new hotness. Everybody wanted to use it. Everybody thought about it. Every CEO wanted to, know the best camping gear to buy and things like this. So they would ask, ChatGPT and things like that. I think everyone can attest to this, that anytime some new technology has been developed, talked about, hyped, released, everybody wants to use it. However, nobody wants to ask those questions, ask the security. Security doesn't even really enter into that conversation until much, much, much later. All right. And in fact, a really great example of this is, I think it was like 2 months ago, this December. Yeah, it was about October sometime. OpenAI, the company that developed ChatGPT, announced that they were going to put together a working group for security. All right, so that's almost a year after everybody's been using this thing. They start to kind of focus on the security piece of this because there are some security issues here, right? Which we'll talk about. At Microsoft, so when ChatGPT was released and OpenAI announced that, I'm one of those really weird people, right? The first thing out of my mouth, the first thing in my head is this thing secure? Is anybody looking at this from a security perspective? So I began that trek right about the same time. And there were myself, a few others. We have a working group within Microsoft. There's up to, 100, 150 of us now. But at the time, it was like, 2 or 3 people, a handful of people kind of focused on the security of this thing. Is this thing secure? Because eventually people are going to start asking that question. If you know the relationship and have heard that between OpenAI and Microsoft, there is a relationship there. So eventually people will just attribute to that security conversation to Microsoft. Well, Microsoft, what are you doing about security for these things, right? So we had to have at least some communication and some messaging around that, right? But security for AI is literally almost absolutely no different than anything else. People tend to look at generative AI and consider and look at the processes, mechanisms, and the technologies in the back end, and which we'll talk about here in a second, just so you understand it. And it can get extremely complex, right? All the different tools and mechanisms, processes that generative AI uses. However, securing AI is no different and any less simple than anything else. If you look at the bullet points on this slide, right, you have to secure the code. So obviously, and I talked about that initially, that's why I was asking about developers in here with us. The first thing, and this is a discussion that has been going on for, I've been in IT, I think, well, if I told you, I'd probably give away my age a little bit, at least 30 years. Let's just put it that way, right? I've been in IT at least 30 years, and there is always been this argument between IT and developers. Developers want admin rights on everything because they feel they can't do their job without admin rights.
Indeed.
That's a security issue. Yeah, that's a security issue. Of course, you know, CEOs, they want admin rights too. That's a different discussion. But it's much easier to have that discussion with developers. So there's been this argument for the past 30 years of security teams holding the developers out saying, well, this is our big security hole. This is our issue. And when you think about AI and people starting to develop these new copilots and assistants and stuff like this, it goes back to that discussion and that argument again. If we only had secure code, we wouldn't have the need for all the defenders in the world, all these Microsoft Defender, you know, for whatever it happens to be, right? We wouldn't need those tools. There's never going to be a perfect world, but there's some things that we can do from a security perspective and as developers to be more security minded and utilize the tools that are available. We don't need our security teams hopping into our developer and into our code and saying, okay, that's insecure, you can't deploy it. We have to deploy the code, right? We're serving the business, we're serving our customers. We have to deploy that code. But there's some things that we're doing at Microsoft from GitHub scanning and things like this. It's going to help with that. And in fact, part of that Microsoft AI tour next month, we're going to talk about and introduce some even new awesome techniques and technologies around scanning that code. So we'll talk about that next month. But it starts with securing the code. That's the first line of defense anytime for anything that we work with in technology, right? Defender for defender. I appreciate that, Luke. The next part of that, and these are going to be very familiar. The rest of these are going to be very familiar to IT pros, right? And security teams. Securing data. Where does that data stored? Who has access to that data? Because when you think about how really base and bare knuckles simple that generative AI is, it's an application that's trained by data to give access to give that response to that user that is requesting access to that data, right? So we're securing a code. We need to secure that data. We do that all the time, right? And we need to secure access. At Microsoft, we had things like Entra ID or Azure Active Directory, which most people still call it, but Entra ID and things like that, right? So secure the code, secure the data, secure the access to that. Those three tenets, that's really simple, isn't it? When you secure AI, that's literally all you need and all you need to focus on. Now, I come from the other side as well, cybersecurity. I'm looking for threats in data. So there is a fourth component, securing the code, securing data, secure access to that application and that data, but then also let's figure out how to audit this data for the potential of threats. Things that that missed our framework and our scope and our web of security that we put over the code, data, and access, we need to also audit because there will be outliers periodically. I talked about earlier about that paradise or that perfect world that will never exist. That's why we have this auditing. So we look through the logs and we identify those outliers where there may actually be threats out there. Someone that's trying to attack, someone has gained access because our CEO clicked on a silly link that gave them access to their passwords. All right.
Sorry, I got a question, Rod. How is it related to like open source code if it's public accessible? Is it still secure and access because if it's public?
So yeah, we'll get to that here in a minute. But we'll take a brief second to kind of talk about that. So there's absolutely multiple areas of code or where code exists or how it's maintained, right? So at Microsoft, that same ChatGPT that is provided through OpenAI, which is a public company, right? Which is publicly accessible. The API is publicly accessible. OpenAI uses your data, the data that you enter into ChatGPT to train its model there's that. There's also the Microsoft side of that. Microsoft in Azure has an implementation, our own implementation, that's completely separate from OpenAI, where we provide the guardrails around security for that, right? So the things that you're used to, RBAC, resource groups, managing through resource groups and things like that, the different services, all of that is contained and provided, the security is provided through Azure, right? So there are those two types of situations. That's why I can't necessarily tell you that Microsoft is going to secure your code if you decide to develop it and provide it and connect it to something else outside of Azure. We can give you that same framework, that same baseline, and say, okay, you need to secure your code, you need to secure your data, and you need to secure access. Well, at that point, you as a customer have to figure out how to do that if it's outside of Azure. If it's outside of those guardrails and those things you know about, you have to figure that stuff out yourself. If it exists within the Azure world, then we help you with a lot of that, right? Through RBAC and things like that, and give you those notifications and alerts when something is amiss or awry, right? So bunch of different ways to kind of look at that, and a bunch of different ways that a lot of customers have to determine which part of that they want to utilize for their organization. I'll be focused today on the Azure side of this. Okay, so I want to make sure everybody is understands that. I'm going to focus on the Azure side because I believe that's, again, I've been working on this for the past year. That is the security zone. You want to work on your applications. You want to build these applications for your organization or for customers external to your organization. You need to start with that security. Again, going back to that whole thing about everybody just wants to use it, let somebody else worry about security. If we use it within Azure, then we have a much better chance to accomplish that. That answer your question? I know it was a roundabout way, but a little bit. All right. I don't want to spend a lot of time here. QR code that you can scan. Again, I said I'd spent the last year on this. I have poured over this a lot over the last year. I wrote a whole series and a whole book. There's a book out on Amazon available for it now called Must Learn AI Security. If you're interested in that security piece, particularly the stuff outside of Azure, okay, and want to know about some of the threats that are out there for AI security, some of those things that might evade or try to go around code, data, and access, then this is like a 400, 500-page book if you're interested in something like that. I'm not going to spend a lot of time there. We don't have a lot of time for that. So why does security matter? As you start looking and we start talking about how to develop your own, why does this actually matter? We know initially, we think as IT folks and security teams, we know what security means, right? We know what it means to the business. We know about regulations. We know about cybersecurity insurance. We know what that's going to cost us. We know about the regulations from the White House and from the government and things like that if you're US based. But what does this actually mean to organizations, right? So there's that compromised security. Nobody wants to wake up tomorrow red-faced because someone's trying to get a hold of you because someone compromised your data, right? And that's, as you'll see as we start talking about generative AI a little bit more, to understand that literally generative AI is based on the data that's being fed to the AI, right? So this data exists somewhere. Generative AI is a lot of people, my mom's the same way. She asks me all the time, what is this AI? And she comes from an older generation, right? She starts thinking about AI. Maybe she's watched Terminator. I really doubt it, but we've grown up with like Terminator things. We think it's going to take over the world, right? But my mom, she asked me almost immediately when I told her, I'm working on AI. She said, oh, it's AI. Is that? And she actually said, isn't that satanic? And it's just that generation of people, right? And you kind of have to explain this, but from a security perspective, it's important to understand exactly what this generative AI does. If you understand code, data, access, you understand how to secure this stuff, right? But that's compromised security can cost a lot in a business perspective from financial losses. Misleading or incorrect outputs. You may have read about this. You may have seen it in news stories. There was something not too long ago, 3 or 4 months ago, I think, a news story about someone asking about medical care and getting really interesting answers. They were inaccurate. They were incorrect. Someone had duped that data model because it wasn't secure, and they didn't secure that data model, and someone had access to it that changed that data model. And so the responses that came back were incorrect. And if had taken at face value instead of trying to, get a second opinion or actually ask a doctor, there could have been really bad consequences. So someone has access to that data, and they make changes and adjustments, then there could be misleading or incorrect results. What does that result in? If it's your company that is providing that application, there's that loss of trust. Nobody wants to use your application anymore, right? Nobody trusts your application. At Microsoft, that's hugely important to us, right? From responsible AI. We want to ensure that the results that you get back either are as absolute and perfect as possible, or at least there, and then you'll see this in most of our copilots. You'll see it in Edge Copilot and also Windows. There's a disclaimer. Well, you kind of need to double check, right? There's not really that perfect world scenario yet. We're all still learning. We're all still building these things together. So there is that loss of trust. You have to worry about that as well. Privacy breaches. Again, I hate to throw my mom under the bus, but she is one of the worst people in the world. She would take her social security number and stick it in one of these things, right? And if you're using OpenAI's version of ChatGPT and you stick in your social security number, guess what? It uses your social security number to train that model. It may be just junk data, but at the same time, it takes that data and it exists at least within it for a brief period of time. It exists within that cache, within that data cache, right? So it's trying to figure out if it needs that information to train the data model or not. We don't do that with an Azure, obviously, but there's those privacy breaches, right? It could be medical information. It could be, again, social security numbers. It could be credit card numbers. If you're allowing people to put that stuff in there, and in your organization, your CEO or whoever it happens to be that doesn't really understand how this stuff works, that data is out there. It's public. It's in this public forum, in this public thing. So that's another reason why this matters. You don't want HR data somehow ending up in a public ChatGPT, right? And another reason, which we'll talk about, why we want to have multiple co-pilots, many co-pilots, as I put them within your organization. There's the legal and regulatory consequences. I think I was in Miami in November, sort of talking about this, when the Biden White House released their their information around the regulations for AI. It's kind of a framework. It's not real detailed. Personally, I hate when governments try to regulate things. I think the industry can much better regulate itself. I hate when governments do it because a lot of times it just tends to seem like they're regulating it just so they can get kickbacks or do something with it, right? That's just the way politics work. But we do have these regulations that were released in end of October, 1st of November, right? What this means for us as organizations, as we start building our own chatbots and our own assistants and co-pilots, we kind of have to keep these things in mind, because eventually, and I promise you it's going to happen probably within the first half of 2024, everybody should know already about these cybersecurity insurance. Everybody kind of has to carry a rider of cybersecurity insurance within their organization, right? Just in case there's some kind of cybersecurity breach, there's processes and methods to follow, and there's repercussions if those aren't followed, right? So there's that insurance that covers those organizations that get breached. Sometime within the first half of 2024, because of these regulations, you'll see a rider attached to cybersecurity insurance that will be essentially responsible AI or safe AI as part of that insurance. So that'll also be something that you'll have to look at within your organizations. That's also interesting because if you read the news today, again, I'm off on vacation, but I'm still reading the news. If you read the news today, you'll see very quickly that Microsoft and OpenAI, Microsoft, because we sponsor OpenAI, is being sued by the New York Times because they believe that their data somehow ended up in some of the responses for these chatbots, right? So there's all those legal and regulatory consequences. Is that something that's going to hurt is going to provide a loss of trust? I don't think so, but that's something we can talk about at a different time. But then, of course, also from a business perspective, there's financial losses that's associated with every one of these bullet points: compromised security, the loss of trust due to the incorrect outputs, privacy breaches, losing HR data, on the web somewhere, and also legal stuff leads to financial losses. That is the ultimate thing there. So all these other things, right? Loss of trust, CEOs don't really care that much about it. We can kind of manipulate the reports and say, hey, we're still doing good as a business. But when the CEO or CIO starts seeing the financial, see the revenue drop through the floor, they're like, well, what's going on? Well, we deployed this chatbot, and guess what? We lost all our HR data, and nobody trusts us anymore because we built a lot of our business on that. So that's when everybody starts panicking, and that's when you have to kind of take a look at all that stuff. All right. Any questions so far? I'm going to take a quick little drink. Nick, you seem to be the question person. You don't have a question?
Not yet so far.
All right. All right. Making sure.
I have more of an observation, right?
Yeah.
What you're talking about basically applies to every other service as well, right? You need to protect your data. You need to make sure you monitor for threats and so on and so forth, right? So it's not a completely new perspective then, if that's
It's
correct?
not. No,
Oh,
it's
okay.
it's literally the same framework we kind of put on top of everything else. It's just, to me, I appreciate this moment in time because, going back to what I was talking about earlier, it bubbles up that developer discussion, right? Because that, to me, is the most important thing about security, to be honest. If we could have that developer discussion and get tools and techniques in place and get developers to buy in on this thing that we've been talking about from security for so long, a lot of these issues would go away. And again, that's why we kind of trying to drive awareness of this is from that developer's perspective, right? We need better, secure, more responsible code. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
Yep.
Thank you.
So does that mean that you need to train developers to understand how to secure the code? And then we work alongside, like architect or platform engineer will work alongside developers for that.
That's one way to accomplish that. I would agree. Some developer security training is awesome. There's a bunch of that out on LinkedIn Learning and some stuff that we have out on in our Microsoft Learning modules. Some other things, though, is some of the tools that we have in place. There's the GitHub Enterprise Scanning and things like that. But I don't know how many people have actually used the GitHub Copilot. You can actually tell GitHub Copilot to look through your code and look for potential security issues and things like that, right? And a lot of people don't use that. I use that all the time because I tell you what, I'm like most of you, I'm not a developer. I will never admit to being a developer because then when you do, people are like, hey, build this thing. But I'm not a developer. I use GitHub Copilot, and oh my goodness, I put together some really cool Python things. So it's been great. Turns a non-developer into I'm not a developer.
Did you mean GitHub Copilot chat? Or?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Super awesome. It even produces KQL. It does a fair job of KQL. We'll talk about that.
Okay.
All right. So what does generative AI do? Let's understand really quickly. Again, so we can figure out what we need to do to secure it or educate our users or educate our developers on security. It literally does three things. Now, there's some other things that it does with GPT-4 now, some actions and things like that we'll talk about here in a second, but very briefly. When ChatGPT was released, OpenAI released it last year, 2022. Very simple. Type something in, ask a question, you get that response, right? Codex, awesome. You can see there's a KQL query. I just talked about that a second ago. Write a KQL query that returns this. There's the response. There's the query that I wanted. I will promise you, though, that that's not an accurate query. If you're familiar with KQL, there's no such table name as user logins. I fixed that, and I'll show you how to fix that here in a minute if you're interested in doing that yourself. But just responses to queries, asking for code. It does an extremely good job with PowerShell. And then also to produce images, which is another one of my favorites. I write a lot of blog articles, and since I'd say early summer, I've never had to source an image on my own. I just create it through DALL-E and through ChatGPT services or Microsoft ChatGPT services. Just an example how far we've come in a very short period of time. That image on the left, there's my query up top to create an image. Will AI blow up the world and take over humanity? That image on the left, that was November 2022. Oh my goodness, that's gross, right? That's horrible. Same query, November this year. We've improved. That's huge improvement, right? So that, again, that's why I'm using the image creation services for my blogs. All right. So how does it do it? This is a very basic look, a very basic piece of, and this is early 2022, of the process that Copilot or ChatGPT actually utilizes, right? So you got your human actions down there at the bottom. We ask the question that gets turned into what's called a prompt that prompts the application. The application does some cool things in the back end. It looks for the data that it's being trained for. You see that content for analysis at the top. And then it pulls that data back and it returns it as the generative AI created content. Looks very simple, right? You got your large language model over on the right-hand side. That's your data that it actually looks at. That data could be anything. That's not the internet. That could be anything that you feed this. If I wanted this to be a Copilot very specific to HR data or medical data, then that LLM would have medical data in it, right? So it's very, very intelligent and very good at that. It may be horrible at KQL, which I promise you it will be, but it will be very good at the data that you feed it. Now we've, again, moved a little bit further. Things have become more complex. And the only reason why I do show the comparison of these two images from the way it used to be to the way it is today, right? This looks a little bit more complex, right? We can utilize AI to go access data from different places. You saw the LLM on the other side, but now you see there's LLM, but we can have multiple LLMs, right? We have multiple data sources. We can have the web as a data source or a web page, right? We can have databases. We can have all this other stuff. We can, based on the return or the results that get returned to the user, we can actually tell it to go do stuff. But the comparison between these two images is a result of this. It's still very simple. Secure the code, secure the data, secure access, and then monitor for the outliers, right? It's still the same. No matter what we do with this generative AI or this AI thing, AI is not going to kill humans. AI is not going to take over the world because we have complete control over what this is, as long as we put it under that framework of that security model, right? So completely understand it. As IT folks, this is a great career to pivot into. Security for AI is like the next, this is gravy here. This is the next profession to get into. Just really quickly, the OpenAI versus Azure OpenAI. So I mentioned that OpenAI is its own company that created, invented, if you will, the ChatGPT stuff and the ChatGPT services. Azure, we co-develop and co-partner with OpenAI. We have our own ChatGPT services that run within the confines of Azure. It does not connect to OpenAI's at all. Remember I said OpenAI actually uses your data to train its data model in certain circumstances. We don't do that. That's why, one of the reasons why we keep it separate. The other reason is because of the security piece. We want our customers, remember that loyalty and that trust, we want our customers to be able to trust that they have complete control over that data that resides and how that data is being utilized within that ChatGPT type interface. Okay, some features of the Azure OpenAI service: the private networking, region availability, the content filtering. You can fine tune the models, and all of the other security pieces that go along with that. All right, I realize we're getting, okay. Here's what I want to do. I think I have, it's going to be the same screen over here. So I mentioned early on that one of the things that really frustrated me about ChatGPT and also even Microsoft's implementation of ChatGPT was the inability to create really good KQL queries. It did a good job. It produced some good stuff. If you're not aware of what KQL is, it's Kusto query language. It is literally the query language for the cloud or anything within Azure that has data involved, whether it's Azure Monitor, even the PaaS version of SQL, Microsoft Intune, even the Defender stuff now, right? And Microsoft Sentinel. They all utilize the same query language. This query language is super powerful because it's unlike anything that has ever been created because it utilizes the power of the cloud, utilizes the compute, the clustering to ensure that the results come back extremely quickly, right? So I use this. I've written a book on this. I've worked with KQL for the last 5 years. It's been, oh my goodness, it's been almost 5 years. So I've worked with this query language, absolutely love it. I think it's the best thing in the world. And then I thought my next favorite thing, ChatGPT, would be able to create KQL queries. But I realized early on that, yeah, it would produce the queries, and it did a pretty good job. But I would still have to know KQL and go in and modify these things myself, because it wouldn't produce the results that I wanted, or it didn't know the tables that I had in my own environment. So I thought, you know what? I need to be able to develop and fix this so that I can have my own little chatbot to be able to produce KQL extremely well. I want to be able, there's that trust loyalty thing. I want to be able to trust my own Copilot to be able to accomplish this. Let me jump over here to my Azure. You can all see that. Hopefully it switched for everyone. It should have.
Yeah, I can see it.
Okay, so I want to create my own Copilot. I want to create my own web-based something that lives and exists within my web browser. To do this, there's like 5 or 6 steps. So we're going to walk through all of them.
Maybe try zoom in, Rod.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Just see. I still what is my Z? Hold on a second. Let me see here. Let me see what I remember. I've been on break for like 2 weeks. So it's Alt Z. Okay. All right. And in fact, let's go ahead and bump this up a little bit. How about 125?
Yeah.
Does that look good?
Yeah.
Is that better? Okay. We'll do that then. All right. So the first thing that we want to do, so I want to create a chatbot, or I want to create a Copilot, or just call it assistant if you want, for KQL, right? So what I have to do is I have to find data sources that know KQL, that list out KQL, that the operators and the tables. I want it to know everything about the things that I am interested in within my own specific environment. This is my Azure console. I access Microsoft Sentinel quite a bit in here. Again, I've worked with Microsoft Sentinel for about 4 or 5 years as well, and I use KQL with that. I'm in this constantly, but I want to get that additional information, that additional value from my own chatbot to help me develop my queries so I can look for security threats within my environment, right? So the first thing that I want to do is identify the knowledge, right? So what I ended up doing, if you go to our Learn docs, there's this Azure Monitor data reference. Literally every table that we have for all of the Azure services, all of them, watch this. I mean, it goes on forever, right? So I knew that my chatbot needed to know about all the tables for all Azure services, right? I also knew that it needed to know all of the operators for KQL, right? So what I ended up doing on this page and also on the KQL reference pages, there's a couple things you can do here. If it's just one thing that I need, it needs to have that knowledge. I don't know if you know about this, but you can do a print of that page and send that to a PDF, right? PDF or JSON, and I'll show you the differences between those in a second. The other thing you can do, and I don't know if everyone knows about this, you can also choose to download that entire volume, that entire tome of Azure Monitor reference in a PDF. It's like, I don't know, 25 pages or something like that, and it's still going, it's still trying to reference it. I think it's like 25 pages, something like that, but it's going to produce a PDF that's pretty large, right? What we want to utilize, our Azure search is limited per file on the amount of data that it can sift through. So this is too large for what our needs are, right? But I want that data. So this is, like I said, this is about 25. If we break this down, it's about 25 different documents. What I ended up doing was taking this, saving this as a PDF, and then Adobe actually has a really cool free tool. There's a multitude of these PDF splitter tools out on the internet. I don't know how many of those I actually trust. As a security person, I'm always like, because you go to those ones, it's like free. Upload your PDF and we'll do it for you for free. But then there are all these little pop-up download boxes for other things. You're like, oh my goodness. Adobe actually has one. I think it's limited to like 20 documents, but at the same time, it's really great to be able to split those PDFs, right? So what I ended up doing was taking that PDF that was created there, splitting it into a number of different PDFs based on topic. The next thing that I want to do, and if I go into Azure Storage here, this is the storage account that I utilize for my chatbot. Let's see here. Okay. First thing that I wanted to do is create a storage account, right? So I've created a storage account to store those split documents, all those PDFs. I also created a file share. You can see it right there. We'll talk about that a little bit more here in just a second. We can also look at all of these in the container. So if I actually open up, and my chatbot is actually called my Rodbot, which I wasn't very creative. Sorry about that. But if we open this up, you can see, look, so there's the KQL docs, aggregate, best practices, cross-cluster, data types, entity types, function types. All of those documents actually exist within this very specific storage container, right? So now I need to be able to feed that stuff to my chatbot. But first, consider this. How often does Microsoft LearnDocs change? How often do we add a new KQL operator? Or how often do the table names change for any of our services? That probably happens more often than the other things.
Every week, every month. Yeah.
Yeah, right? So just as soon as I create that PDF and I split that PDF and I put it in my storage container, guess what? Everything changes. So now my bot is going to be unintelligent once again. And I need to have the best intelligence for my bot. So what I ended up doing, and a lot of organizations do this as well, I created a drive mapping that sits here on my PC, right? And so anytime one of those changes, all I have to do is take the changes, create that new PDF file, and update those specific files here. So every time that this gets updated, I'll show you the indexer here in a second, my Copilot or my assistant will always know, because that data is always available, updated. Something I have to do personally, and I could automate that. Yeah, absolutely. But the reason why I kind of highlight this and bring this out for everyone is that as you start thinking about doing this yourself in your own organizations, HR is probably going to want their own, or the finance department is probably going to want their own. Think about this. How many times do you want HR to have access to financial data, or finance, purchase orders and things like that, having access to HR data? Or how many times do you want your security team to have access to the salary information of your CEO, right? So you don't want to train one single assistant across the entire organization. You're probably going to want to have multiple, each with their own storage container, each with their own indexer, so that they're always getting the stuff that's up to date. The reason why I do it this way, for me, I'm updating this manually. A lot of organizations, HR and things like this, they'll have people that update information, whether it's a CSV file, a JSON, maybe it's a SQL database that can be exported to CSV, but they can run a process. Maybe it's automated, maybe it's something they have to kick off, or maybe it's a document they update on the storage container. And just as soon as they update it, guess what? It is immediately available to that Copilot. So it's always up to date, but you also have it split across organizations. Finance doesn't have access to HR data. HR doesn't have access to security data and all that good kind of stuff. So you want to keep these separated. So that's why I do it this way, right? So it's really easy to update this myself, or have someone as part of an organization. It's their responsibility to provide this update.
Rod,
Yes.
may I ask you a question?
Yeah.
So you are basically creating mini copilots, right?
Yep.
Separating by interest or some classified information or something like this. So in terms of cost, do I have extra cost by having multiple mini copilots, or is it the same of having just one? And then, I'm not sure if we can teach Copilot to say, oh, please, if the profile is X, please don't show this information.
So you talked a little bit earlier about the FinOps and how to utilize cost analysis within Azure. So you can see mine here, right? I'm virtual machines. I have everything because of Microsoft Sentinel shoved into the same resource group, right? So you're going to see my virtual machine stuff with my Azure Cognitive Services and Sentinel and all that good kind of stuff. However, I can separate these by resource group. HR has their own resource group, or finance has their own resource group. And that's where that data model, that's where that Copilot resides. So yeah, you would only see, if you do the filtering up top, I only want to see based on this HR resource group, you'd be able to see only those costs for that organization. Does that make sense?
Yes, but in terms of cost, having multiple many co-pilots, would that be more expensive?
No more cost than normal. It's a flat service rate for those different tokens and stuff that you utilize. So even though it's split across organizations so that you can identify which one's potentially using it more or using more data, it's not going to cost any more by having multiples.
All right, thank you.
Yep.
So after we do get a set of tokens up for each subscription, like we can use per day. So we just have to want to increase. You have to tell Microsoft for.
Yeah. So if we, and kind of getting ahead a little bit, but if we go into these different deployments here, and I have all these different deployments, each of these deployments gets tokens, right? You can see my rate limits and the different tokens that are and the capacity and the different tokens for those, right? So every one of those would be actually applied differently because Chat GPT 3.5 is different than 4. So the cost will be a little bit different between those, but it's not going to vary based on how many that you have deployed, right? So I'm still going to use this. I'm going to use this same one, but with a different, and I'll show you here in a minute, I'll use the same one, but for a different resource group, right? So I'm not duplicating my models. I'm only deploying one model. I'm just utilizing that across different areas.
Yeah. Quite efficient. Yeah, when we're talking about costs, and that's a quite efficient approach.
Yep. So the next thing that we want to do, just storing it in that storage container doesn't make it available to my assistant or my copilot, right? The next thing that we need to do is go into, and I just noticed this today, by the way, being off 2 weeks, it's as frustrating for us as it is our customers to jump into the Azure console and see things, renamed or mixed up or thrown different places. It used to be cognitive services, but now it's Azure AI search. And this is where I will go into this RodBot search right here and create an indexer, right? So what you need to do at this point is I have an indexer that has been created here that actually looks at that data container. It indexes, I think I have this one set because I don't update mine that often. I have it set to like every day, right? So it's indexing it every day. It's looking for new things and it's updating the index based on the documents that exist in that container. If it's HR, if it's another organization, your security team may only need once a day. Your HR folks, depending on how busy they are, hiring people, you can adjust that indexer. They may need it every hour, but you can update that indexer how often that you need for it to be able to run so that that bot has the data that's been updated. So you can do minutes, right? It's not just an hour, but you can do minutes. You can do as quickly as you want and update that schedule so that it runs consistently and constantly. All right, so you can see I have my indexes in here now. And if we go into my indexer, it's going to ask me to, okay. No, forget that. I'm not going to do that. The next thing we do, so we create our data storage. We create our indexer to make sure that we're always getting the most updated and current data. Now let's go into, this is what we call the Azure OpenAI Studio, right? This is a request-only service right now. It really doesn't take long to get that request approved and finalized, and an email show up and say, hey, you now have access. In the early days when we first released Azure OpenAI, it took a little bit of time, sometimes 2 weeks, a little bit longer, because we were still kind of building out the architecture and the infrastructure for OpenAI services. Over the past year, we have done that. So you'll actually get a response much quicker, but it's still a request. This is the Azure OpenAI AI Studio. I don't know if you paid attention during Ignite this year, Microsoft Ignite, but we also announced another one called Azure AI Studio. So like we tend to do, we create all the consoles for everything, and then eventually we consolidate. Anybody that's worked with Microsoft Defender products knows that we had like 100 different consoles everywhere, and now we're starting this consolidation process. We're doing the same thing with Azure OpenAI. All right. So this one doesn't have everything that I have over here right yet, but it will very soon. In fact, again, going back to that Microsoft AI tour, we'll talk about that probably more along February or March as we start to consolidate and move everything into this Azure AI Studio. But for the time being, there's this chat service within the Azure OpenAI Studio And I mentioned earlier that
So one
I
question, Rod.
go ahead. Sorry.
When you say consolidate all the OpenAI into AI Studio, is that mean moving Office 365 Copilot, Security Copilot in that studio?
No, I apologize for that. This is the developer side of this, right? The services, the management, the maintenance, and the developer side of creating these applications. So this is different than the Microsoft stuff. This is kind of giving you some insight into how we actually do it, right, on the back end to provide these services for you. But no, the models and everything that's proprietary IP to Microsoft, those are actually provided somewhere else. And like access to Office Copilot, you'll still get that through your Office admin console and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Right? So yeah, we're not moving the Copilot stuff here. We're just moving the development of the Copilot.
Okay, thanks.
And it's probably a horrible thing to just say Copilot, because really, I'm not creating a Copilot. I'm creating my Rodbot or my assistant, right? Yeah. Copilot, unfortunately, cannot be registered or copyrighted. Everybody can have a Copilot, but at the same time, that's what Microsoft has termed or decided to call our AI products and services that we supply to customers. Yeah, so it's a little confusing. I get it. But you saw earlier, I had created that data source. We've actually added a few things here. Again, I stopped in and looked at this morning after 2 weeks and realized, oh my goodness, they've added some really cool stuff. The one I thought was extra cool was this URL web address, which again, this is probably what might get people into trouble by putting in the New York Times and trying to use their data to update your data model. I have no idea, but just be careful with it. Again, that's a security thing, privacy thing. Be careful what web address, but you could actually utilize, maybe you're creating a bot for your blog. You could enter your URL here for your blog and create a chatbot just for your blog to supply to your blog readers. Hey, search my blog, get the answers to my stuff. So that's actually pretty cool. But what we're doing here, and you see this, Azure AI search, initially, the only thing that you could do here was the blob storage and cognitive search. But again, they've changed this to AI search. They've rebranded to Azure AI search versus cognitive services. All right. So you saw these names. You should be familiar with these when you saw these in my console just a minute ago. There's that Rodbot search. I'm also going to pick my index. We looked at my indexer a little bit ago. We make it so super easy to connect this. All right. So what I'm doing here is I'm actually adding my data, adding that data source to this bot that I want to create. So by going through this process here, it's going to, there we go, keyword. It's going to take that data that I'm storing in that data container, utilizing that index, and it's going to associate it with this instance of this chat playground that I have here. I'm not going to go ahead and do that here because it takes a little bit of time, but understand that by doing that, the next thing that I want to do, I choose my deployment. I want ChatGPT 4, of course, because it's the most current. I always like the super shiny new stuff. All I have to do at this point is deploy to a new web app. And this does everything for me, right? I'll name my app. I select my subscription, my resource group, the one that I'm utilizing. You saw that for my security. Where did it go? It's here. Oh, this one's it. Sorry. Couldn't see it. Of course, you got to choose where you want it to reside. I'm in East US. Obviously, you have to select a pricing plan. I'm not a pricing guy. I'm not going to be able to tell you which one is which here. Enable chat history. There's some other things. Anyway, I can configure this. And once I'm done with this, I click that deploy button. And in about 5-10 minutes, it will deploy. And if we take a look here, this, ta-da, is Rodbot. All right. I mentioned earlier that the only reason why I really wanted to create this, because I use KQL all the time, and I would love for this thing to be able to create KQL for me. All right. Let me drop out of this really quick to show you an example. So if I take this, here's my AI prompt, write a KQL query for bad logins to Azure Intra ID. So if I do it in here without that data that I've trained it with, right, in just standard Azure OpenAI chat playground, I'm going to do this. I'm going to ask it, write that same thing here, write a KQL query for bad logins to Azure Intra ID. Actually, it's making a liar out of me. Earlier today, it's tried to use user logs. So it actually did the right thing this time. I was trying to show you that. But we'll take a look at the difference between these. If I do it in my own chat bot, it's going to produce a much better, much cleaner, much better query. Maybe, oh, I know why it is. It's because we have it. Okay. It's because we have it. Sorry about that. It's because we have the screen bumped up to 125. It's not looking very good. But this is a much better query than the one that is provided, just the stock query without being trained on my data. Okay. The other piece of this I wanted to show you, which I thought was actually kind of funny. Do you see how it responds to me? Oh, honey, you must be in some serious need of my sassy assistance. Here's a KQL query for Azure Enterprise ID. Now you can keep an eye on those mischievous failed logins. Good luck and happy querying. Now, why does it do that? Huh? Well, here's something that actually pretty cool. You can personalize your chatbots. Say, let's see, what's your favorite, Nick? What's your favorite Looney Tunes character?
Scooby-Doo.
Scooby-Doo. And responds like Scooby-Doo. All right, so let's ask it the same thing. Let's save that. Ask it the exact same thing. Let's see how it responds. Ruh-roh, here's a KQL query for finding bad logins. That's pretty cool, right? I can even ask it. Oh, let's do this. I can even give it a name, right? So let's go ahead and save this back to the default. I say something like, what is your name? All right. It's going to yell at me because I'm an AI. How can I have a personal name? But if I say and respond like, do, boy, I can't even spell right now. Do, okay, let's save it again. Let's say, what is your name? All right. Oh, there you go. Call Scooby Assistant. So you can even give it a name. I can say, hey, you are this. In the system message, I say respond like this, and it's going to respond that way. So if you look at mine, again, if we go back and look at that same.
Is that the reason why it called you honey? Or is it what if they want to call like formal conversation?
So this is, yeah, I was getting ready to explain that. So there we go. And that actually worked out this time. It calls me honey. So you probably see my background, right? I love a TV show from the 1970s. This TV show, $6 Million Man, started in 1974. So all my TV and movie references are old. Take that into account before we go on, okay? I wrote this chatbot, and I probably should go back and change it, to be Flo from Mel's Diner, which was a 70s comedy TV show. And she was kind of a Southern belle, and that's just literally the way she responds. She just calls me honey all the time and sugar and asks me if I need anything. And like I said, I probably better change that.
But honey's not in your data though, that you got from the Microsoft Learn. So that's weird.
Well, because I changed it, because not only am I feeding it the data, but it's still utilizing those algorithms from the ChatGPT services or the Azure OpenAI services that exist within Azure. So it still has access to that same type of process and technology to know about such things, right? It's just not connected to the World Wide Web to do so, or connected to OpenAI.
Rod, is it chit chat, that kind of stuff that you can change maybe the mood or the way that we interact with the bot?
Repeat that. Sorry, I missed the first part of it.
Now, is it chit chat, that component from AI that Microsoft has? I'm not sure if you are aware of this component, but it basically changes the way that you can treat whoever is interacting with you. Yeah,
you should supply that link or whatever, because yes, I'm aware of that. There's a few other things. We have the ability within Power Apps to create these same chatbots, right? So any customer can do it. I thought this was kind of interesting because this is, we're essentially using our own services to do this. This is how we would accomplish this, right? With all the other stuff, but we've made it super easy. Some really cool UI type front ends to be able to create this stuff yourself. Again, Power Apps is one of those. There's some other tools to be able to accomplish that as well. Still uses the same security mechanisms, but you just don't have to think about it. But I'm the kind of person, I like to see the guts. I like to know how the sausage is made, because as a security person, if one of my users ends up using Power App and then shares this bot across, the company, I don't know where they created it or how they created it. I don't know what it's doing on the back end. I as a security person, I want to know that. So I know that it's okay for everybody. So I believe, let me see here. We're like 1 minute past, but I have these slides just in case the demos don't work. But just a reminder, I'll leave it at that. It's a very simple security process, building awareness around security for AI. Awesome profession, new career pivot to kind of take a look at if that's something that you're interested in. But hopefully that was interesting to everybody, right? How simple and easy we've made it to kind of create your own stuff. There's some nuances to it, but at the same time, like I said, I envision companies kind of creating their own chat bots for almost every department that needs it or organization, right? So that's one of the ways that you can accomplish that. All right. Any questions for me?
Because so they mean that they're going to be AI security roles and stuff that in companies that are instead of
so Microsoft, yep. Right now we actually have a couple different AI exams. So there's kind of the beginner's exam, which is the associate thing, and then there's the second one. You can take the second one and totally skip the first one, but we have a couple of those. I was actually writing today a AI certification blog post that hopefully I'll have it done here in the next few days. But different certifications you can take. There's IBM has one, Google has one, we have ours. There was one other that I was looking at today. Look, I'm just kind of finishing up on costs and stuff like that. So.
Okay.
But that's it from me. Any other questions? Somebody has to have a question.
Yes, I do. Let me ask you another question. So at the beginning of your talk, you mentioned that the developers could use GitHub Copilot to improve the security of their code, right?
Yep.
And which is great, but we know that different developers, they have different levels of awareness and also knowledge. So the questions, the way that you prompt your questions, you may have different answers. Would you have or recommend any way of creating a standardized way to look for security issues, like running in a pipeline, some sort of scanning using GitHub Copilot, for instance?
Yeah. So we have a couple things that we're working on. I mentioned we're going to be talking about this next month, but some additional scanning mechanisms for the code if that's where the code exists. Another piece of that, which I think is super important, I don't think a lot of people realize this. Your prompt is okay. Just like everybody has a family member that for whatever reason can't seem to use Google. They can't find results. You're just like, why can't you use Google? It's so easy. And they're like, how did you find that? Well, I just typed this in. AI is very similar. It's going to be the same people that have problems with Google are going to have problems getting the results they want with AI. And when in AI, it's called prompts. There's a whole profession that is growing right now called prompt engineering. I don't know if you all have heard of this or not.
Yeah.
It's kind of the content developer side of things. In fact, I'm trying to get my oldest son interested in this because I think it's going to be huge. But it's designing those prompts. It's figuring out the best way to create prompts. And what we're doing at Microsoft, one of the things that I'm super excited about when Copilot for Security releases sometime early this next year, it has what is called prompt books. So customers and Microsoft have developed prompts that work for them. and they'll be able to store those as prompt books and share those with everybody. So I kind of envision that with GitHub as well. So number one, there's that prompt training, which I think everybody's kind of going to have to get into if they want to be able to utilize this correctly. The second piece of this is being able to save the prompts that work so that they can be reused. And then I envision a day when that GitHub Copilot will also have those prompts and prompt books that have worked for other people. They'll be able to run those same things.
Yeah, that's a great idea indeed. Simple yet effective. You share what works, and then everybody else uses it. Yeah.
We're all in this together, whether it's the developer side, security side, IT infrastructure, it all really, really works together. And it works best when people share knowledge, right? Instead of just kind of silo and trying to keep it to themselves. So that's kind of the way we look at it as well. We want to ensure that, everybody has success. So we should be able to share that stuff.
When you say audit for AI practice, audit your Azure OpenAI resources or the code?
Which one?
The on the screen. When you said remind.
Oh, that was the cost. Yeah, we actually went to that earlier because people ask that all the time. People will ask, "What's that cost you?" And I promise I don't have a huge environment. I have everything in the same resource group. Don't hate me. You're like, you're a security person. You have everything in the same resource group. But I do all this for Microsoft Sentinel. In fact, what really started me down this path, looking into AI and looking into the security of AI, being a Microsoft Sentinel person, I want access to those logs. I want to know what's in those logs so that I can, identify there are actual threats. So that's why everything sits within my Microsoft Sentinel resource group. I have virtual machines, Azure Cognitive Services, which is actually Azure AI. You can see that's my second largest cost, and that's my bot, right? Well, actually, that's not the bot. That's the indexer, right? That's not the bot that's costing me anything. It's that indexer that runs. I could, minimize those costs if I change my index schedule and things like that. Plus, it's indexing a lot of data. That original PDF is it's huge, right? Until I split them up, and that's a lot of data that it's indexing. So I could minimize that even further. I'm using PDFs. Our indexer supports PDF, CSV, and JSON. Now, if I use JSON instead of PDF, that would minimize my cost significantly because that's
yes.
smaller.
And you could also try to archive the PDFs after indexing the document as well. Yeah. You create some sort of life cycle for the file, and then you put in archive T or something like this. Yeah.
Yep. So there's ways to minimize those costs as well. You and I should probably talk about that. I bet you could use that quite a bit in your presentation too, to how to minimize those. That would be cool. But yeah, there's my cost. Like I said, it's a really small environment, but the costs are not that much. That bot.
Okay. So how, when you develop, for example, because someone told me when you develop landing zone for Azure and stuff, you just put AI in a separate subscription than other services because you don't want to tie it together because AI is a separate element than your Azure resources.
So I've not heard that. I would be interested to have that discussion.
Would you put it together within overall resources, or you need a separate subscription, or you put it together?
Yeah, I would be interested to have that discussion about putting in a separate subscription. I don't necessarily agree with that, but I would be willing to hear the other side of it. So,
okay. I think it's just because it's easier to track costs and easy to track budget and those things, policies, because if it's under separate subscription.
Well, and at the same time, we're still, we're talking about, you can be very, very granular within Azure about control, access, management, and the costs, right? Yeah. So I can change my group, who it's grouped by. I can change. Right now, I'm in a specific subscription. I could change it to a specific resource group if I wanted to do that. And Cost analysis utilizes RBAC as well. So my finance people can't, well, you want the finance people in here. My HR people can't come in here and look at the finance costs, what they're charged, what their cost in the company. They could only see their cost if I allowed that. So it's you can be very granular about who has access even to the cost analysis.
Okay. I think that's it. Have you got any questions for Robin?
Oh, no questions. I'm still digesting everything that was,
I'm
was
sorry.
presented.
Sometimes I
But
go too
AI
quick.
taking over.
no questions. Awesome session. That's all I can say at this moment.
But then a lot of people thinking that AI is going to reduce people's jobs and stuff, and then but
No. And in fact, I think that's another reason why at Microsoft we've branded it as an assistant or a co-pilot.
yeah,
It's not a replacement. There's always going to be a human that needs to be part of that technology, right? Whether it's feeding it the data or managing it or securing it, that it's actually going to, for a lot of people, accelerate their responsibility.
Yeah, because something like pull requests, AI can't read through those because it's only a human can.
Yeah. Well, and you got to think, just as soon as something happens with that bot that somebody created that is available publicly, just as soon as something happens, security team is going to get a ring, right? And if what if they thought that AI was going to replace their security team? Who do we call at that point? Yeah.
Okay. All right. So any more questions? So let me just play a small little outro video for next episode, and we can click in the stream. And then 1 minute. Da, da, da. So that's next episode. So stay tuned. Oops.